They're calling it the worst civic tragedy in Israel's entire history. The United States seems to be working very hard to show the world that they really just don't care about Israel. Learn all this and much more right here on the Joshua and Caleb Report.
In a world plagued with anti-Israel propaganda, Paul Yavel presents the Joshua and Caleb Report, a positive voice of truth straight from Israel's heartland.
In a world of negativity and fake news, every Christian should be connected to the life and positivity that Israel brings to the world. Guys, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell, and leave us comments down below. We always like engaging with you there. This is the Joshua and Caleb Report, part of the Joshua and Caleb Network, which can all be found completely free at joshuaandcaleb.com. All of our content, shows, other YouTube channels, podcasts, articles, each and every week. You can subscribe at joshuaandcaleb.com, absolutely free. I'm Luke Hilton here with Joshua Waller on the Mount of Blessing in the biblical heartland of Israel. Great to be with you today. So much happening in Israel. Last week, we released our second adventure show, so we weren't here in the studio covering any news or anything that's happening in Israel, and a whole lot happened in the last couple of weeks. We'll get to all that in just a second. If you haven't seen our last adventure show, make sure you check that out right here on the YouTube channel. You don't want to miss it. It was a good one. Got more adventure shows coming up, so stay tuned. By the way, if you want to support any of our content that's coming up and help us continue this work of getting the message and the truth out, you can go to patreon.com/Joshua and Caleb. By the way, certain levels get these cool Joshua and Caleb Network mugs. So
they
first
drink
time we have them on the show today, here today. So patreon.com/Joshua and Caleb. You can sign up to be a monthly supporter and get one of these cool mugs for yourself. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening. It's absolutely, completely free. Josh, just to run over a couple things happening in Israel right now as far as elections and politics in the Israeli government. Prime Minister Netanyahu's mandate to form a coalition government is expiring today. By the time you see this show, it's going to have already expired, so that's why we won't go into too many details because there's no telling what will happen. Go look it up if you're watching this and see what's happening next. What will probably happen, what the predictions are, is that President Rivlin will hand the mandate to Yair Lapid, who's the leader of the biggest left-wing party, and then he'll try to put together a coalition. If he's successful, it'll probably look like left-wing parties, center parties, and right-wing parties all put together. So that would be super interesting, something I don't think that's ever happened before.
Which is also, there's not a real clear path to how that could even be possible.
No,
most likely
sure.
It's a dead-end street again, and there won't be a coalition made, right-wing or left-wing, with Yair Lapid.
I guess you could say Israelis, politicians and citizens alike, are pretty fed up.
And there just doesn't seem to be a way to form a government with the current group of folks in that department.
So we'll see what happens with Israel's politics. Whether are they going to get a government? Yes, no, we'll see. We are entering the last week of Ramadan. You've probably heard that a lot of violence and protests and riots have been happening in Israel over the last couple weeks. A lot of that has to do with Ramadan. We'll get into it a little bit here in a minute. But last week of Ramadan, which could actually be the most violent, if there is more things that are going to happen, it's probably going to happen in this next week. So pray for Israel in that regard. And last, Israel's biggest tragedy that's doesn't have to do with a war or a battle or anything like terrorism or anything like that. They call it the civic tragedy. The holiday of Lag BaOmer, which if you're watching, you probably have no idea what that is. Over the last week,
last Thursday,
45 citizens were trampled to death in a stampede. Yeah. Josh, you want to kind of, it's a little bit of a complicated holiday, so we can't get into it, but just tell us what.
It's a very Jewish holiday.
Lag BaOmer.
In basic, they're celebrating a rabbi of the past that had a lot of great wisdoms. They all gather together and celebrate this rabbi, and it's a huge thing, especially in the Haredi Jewish community,
right.
Which there was over 100,000 people gathered at this event, and just crazy. We mourn with families of the lost. that such a tragedy would happen. But there was a slick path there that it was super crowded. People slipped and fell, and then people began to pile.
We're talking about 100,000 people in one location,
right? Yeah.
And infrastructure that should have been fixed a long time ago, and a lot of people called for it, but it was just, it's one of those things that nobody realizes is so serious until a tragedy like this happens.
Yeah. So we're certainly mourn with loss, and it comes at a time that the whole nation is really in a time of with Ramadan going on, all these riots going on, and then something internal happens. So the nation is really shaken right now. Bibi Netanyahu had declared a national day of mourning just this past this week, Sunday. And
I went into the grocery store on Sunday, and they even had candles burning as memorial inside the grocery store.
The nation of Israel knows how to celebrate together, but they also know how to mourn together. And when one person in the nation of Israel passes, the whole nation feels it. And that's what I think there's a beautiful thing of the nation of Israel and the people of Israel. They truly are a people. They are a group of people that celebrate together, but also in a time like this, they're mourning together. Speaking of that, and this is really, I want everybody to understand, this is really shaking the nation. The entire nation, as we said, is gathered in mourning together over the losses. As we're speaking about this, Luke, we're also talking about the Ramadan and the terrorism that has hit Israel. The IDF is on high alert.
Right.
They've been super busy about and making sure the people of Israel are safe. But just 2 days ago, we had a shooting just down the road from here, to Puak Junction,
right,
where an Arab car drove up to the bus stop. Me and you, we pass this bus stop all the time, and just started shooting at the bus stop. And here there were 3 yeshiva students who were there at the bus stop, all 3 19 years old, all going to yeshiva school just down the road here. And 2 of them were hit pretty bad. Everyone, thank God, is still alive, but the one is in critical condition. So
right.
We should
be fighting for his life right now. You can pray for pray for Yehuda Guetta. Pray for all Yehuda, 3, but Yehuda is the one that's fighting for his life right now and really not sure if he's going to make it.
Right.
So if you're watching this, listening to this, make sure and pray for Yehuda, that God would spare his life and heal him. And as of right now, the IDF is still searching for the terrorists. They've caught someone that they believe might have been helping the terrorists, and they've also found the car that they believe to be the car that was used, but they haven't caught the actual terrorists. And I want to talk about something right now, because Fatah, which is basically the Muslim branch that is running the Palestinian Authority government. You have Hamas that runs Gaza. Fatah runs the Palestinian Authority. They released a message, I think via social media, but to this area, the northern Shomron area where the terrorists fled to, actually telling Palestinian residents to delete any evidence that they might have that could aid the IDF in capturing the terrorists. And I want to read, this is quote, word for word, okay? Translated from Arabic. Our allotted people, honored members of our people, we call on you to get rid of the contents that were stored in the cameras of your homes or your businesses today, security cameras, and not to transfer any media content among yourselves that the occupation, Israel, is spreading. Then the call follows this attack in which 3 people were wounded, 1 fighting for his life. It goes on, quote, this is Fatah talking to the Palestinians of the area. Our lauded people, members of our people in the towns and villages in the southern Nablus district who are standing firm, we salute you for your stand alongside those who are caught in a dead end from among our people that gives much of itself. The Fatah movement's Nablus's branch emphasized that resistance is a natural right of the Palestinian people against the Zionist arrogance. Okay, so to be clear, the organization that runs the Palestinian Authority government, where everyone wants to establish a Palestinian state, every country, Western country in the world has been trying to negotiate with them and mediate between them and Israel for a Palestinian state for years and years and years and years. These same people, and once again, this happens, there's a huge difference between what Muslim leaders say in Arabic and what they say in English. They're saying...
We didn't find this on English. This was a media watch.
No, this is by Arabic. An organization called Palestinian Media Watch, which they basically reveal what the things like this that
they search Arab news
in Arabic.
And they pull out. Yeah.
They are telling terrorists that tried to murder Jews and possibly, they're not sure if he's going to make it, to to delete any evidence they might have. You know, this car takes off into Nablus. Any shop owners along the road, homeowners, if you have security cameras that were pointed towards the road, the IDF might come to you and ask for your footage. Make sure to delete it now. Don't send messages to each other on WhatsApp or you know, Telegram, whatever, with any videos of what you have. Delete it, because the IDF might find it, and then that could help them in capturing the terrorists. These are the people that we're dealing with. This is who the United States administration wants to deal with right now to create a Palestinian state. It's just
who they are dealing with. Luke.
Crazy.
They're actually going at it, trying to establish, just like they are with Iran. They're just as happy to come in here to create a Palestinian state. It's actually their policy is to create a Palestinian state that actually engages in what you've just described, trying to cover up just blatant wannabe murderers.
And Mahmoud Abbas, he tells the international community in English that he rejects terror. But in Arabic, he supports terror. He honors terrorists. He encourages terrorists. He aid and abetting.
Right.
Not only that, but he pays salaries to terrorists in Israeli prisons and to their families. So it's just, you have to know what's actually going on here, guys. And this is it. Yeah. There was another terrorist attack that happened in Gush Etzion. A Palestinian woman approached Israeli soldiers at another junction, Gush Etzion junction, had a knife in her hand, would not stop when the soldiers told her to stop, kept advancing, would not put down the knife, and they eventually shot and killed her. Now, after these two terrorist attacks happened, in the space of 1 day, pretty much, Reuters, international media now, their headline says, West Bank violence, Palestinian woman killed, 2 Israelis wounded. Now, the millions of people that probably read that, what do you think they're thinking when they see that headline? Violence in the West Bank. 1 Palestinian woman was killed as a result. 2 Israelis were wounded. Not only are they mixing these two murderous attacks together, but they're basically painting out the Palestinians as the victim. Right. Once again, what actually happened? 2 terrorism attacks by Palestinians against Jews. As a result, the one terrorist attack, the terrorist is still not caught, and the other one, thank God, the terrorist was shot and killed by IDF forces because she would not put down the knife.
She was advancing with a knife. What are you going to do? Of course, you have to take that out. The thing is, Luke, is it's so barbaric because literally this person doesn't know anybody. He just drives down the road and takes his gun out and starts shooting at a bus stop. How barbaric can you get? And to condone that kind of behavior, guys, may this be information that you take to heart and understand. This cannot be. This is just not acceptable. It's not acceptable behavior, and it can't be condoned. And as it is in the world, you're not going to hear about it. Reuters, that's not okay. Right. You can't just wash over these stories with a anti-Israel bias and make these things seem like this. People out there in the world will be brainwashed by these things and think there's already enough propaganda going out there against this stuff. At least tell the stories right, and that's what we're here for, Luke. We're here to tell. So
number one,
correctly.
Don't believe it, but number 2, you have a responsibility to get the truth out. So share this video, share this podcast, but just tell people this is actually what happens. I know the stories. I know people that live close to where these things happened. This is the truth. Don't believe international media with headlines that are just absolute outright falsehoods. Blatant lies. We'll be right back with the show, but first I have to tell you about the Christians Meet Israel 30-day devotional. Whether or not you're an avid Israel lover or just beginning to love Israel, this easy-to-read book is for you. It includes many of the promises where God talks about Israel in the Old and New Testaments. Each day has a short explanation, space for taking notes, and a thought-provoking question at the end. Written by Zach Waller, this devotional is something that is very much needed for the body of believers worldwide right now. You can get your copy by clicking the link in the description below or just order it on Amazon. It's the perfect devotional to go through by yourself or with your whole family. We promise it'll cause you to look at Israel in an entirely new light. You'll see God's land and people through His eyes and the lenses of Scripture. Purchase Christians Meet Israel by Zach Waller on Amazon or click the link in the description below. Use promo code Joshua and Caleb for a special listener-only discount.
On the same topic, we've got the PA elections are coming up, and
we're coming up.
And they hope that they're coming up again. But let me tell you, it's been 15 years.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. 15 years he's been in office.
It's 15 years he's been in office.
Way past his term limit.
I just realized what's going on though. It's a big mess of a scene. They're trying to act like they're a democracy.
Right.
the PA is nothing close to a democracy.
Syria, Syria's trying to hold elections right now too, and they also have a show of democracy. They have like 2 other candidates against Assad.
Do you realize the reason that Abbas has made a big cover-up deal that there's people in East Jerusalem that were Israel didn't want to put voting booths. There was a big story about Israel and it's some offset thing that really is not connected to the reason why elections not held. The real reasons why Abbas canceled the elections, although he blamed it on Israel, is that he will lose.
Scared. Exactly.
He will lose, which is actually bad and it's actually bad for Israel too, which Israel also in its right would want to try to keep, although he's terrible.
Right, that's where it gets complicated.
He's not as bad as what would be elected.
Right, the least terrible that Israel might have to deal
Hamas, if elections are held, according to stats, would take over.
And then you have Gaza times 10.
Would be Gaza
in Judea and Samaria.
Moving into Judea and Samaria.
Right, exactly. As in like rockets flying, not just knife attacks, shooting attacks, but actually rockets flying and just horrible, horrible stuff.
Right. So we have this. This is also, not only do we have Ramadan, but we also have the PA elections is causing a little bit of unrest because, like always, they're blaming it on Israel. Israel won't let us have elections. It's all a game that is totally not true, but that's always the way it is. Israel's always the blame for something not going the way they wanted it to, when really it's a political move to stay in power. He's been doing it for 15 years. It's not a democracy. Don't be confused, world. The PA is not a democracy.
No, absolutely not. And it was meant to originally be an interim government until the Palestinian National Council could be formed. That never actually happened. Last I checked, Mahmoud Abbas was making about $1 million a month, and I think he has a $13 million mansion outside of Ramallah. So, I mean, obviously he doesn't want to leave this cushy job of leading the Palestinian Authority. Right. So he makes up excuses like, well, Israel said they might not let Israel didn't even for sure, man. They might not let East Jerusalem residents vote, so we're going to postpone elections. Not only that, but he actually declared a 30-day state of emergency. Nobody really knows why for sure, but it has something to do with the elections, and evidently he does it so often that nobody is too surprised. But what's interesting is now lots of people are actually calling for Abbas's resignation because of his incompetency in postponing elections, calling for a state of emergency. He actually pledged a few days ago to a senior British representative that he would not postpone elections. 2 days later, he said he's postponing them. Senior Qatari officials, which is very surprising because evidently Mahmoud Abbas is very close in his business ties and personally and through the PA to Qatar. And we know that Qatar sends a lot of money to Gaza and the West Bank. Yep. So they're actually upset with Abbas, even though he's pretty close to them. Figures in Europe, European Union, they're upset with him. So everybody's calling for him to resign and basically let the younger generation take over. Like we said, that might not actually be the best thing for Israel. So not only confusing politics in Israel, but also confusing politics in the Palestinian Authority, which was a temporary government that was supposed to govern the Palestinian people, and they do a horrible job at it. But it's just a mess of things going on.
On top of the mess of things, you got Ramadan, once again, that's happening that is really making a mess of it. Can you imagine, Luke, if you did a whole month where you just didn't eat anything all day and then ate all night?
Well, you don't drink either.
And you don't drink. It's like
sunrise to sunset, no food, no water.
So I was
40 days.
I was down in the local Arab town over here. And I was talking to one of the guys. I stopped and talked to one of the Arab guys there, and I was asking him what Ramadan, like what do you do for Ramadan? I was a little bit ignorant, actually ignorant anyway. I really don't know that much about it, but I wanted to know from him what he said. It's like a prayer. I was like, a prayer is like a prayer. Right. So Ramadan is like, so it's really like you could call it like a bit fanatical, like where they're praying. And the prayer, a lot of the Arab response when you're being fed Hamas style radical Islamic prayer, okay, that's going to turn into deeds. And that's why we have a lot of the upheaval that we're having with elections, with Ramadan, like tons of terrible things happening at Jerusalem. There's riots going on, Arabs going crazy. Well, this is what it is. This is their prayer.
I would definitely be grumpy if I wasn't eating or drinking every day for 40 days. I mean, during the daylight hours. But I would also think I wouldn't have a lot of energy to riot. But I guess maybe that's why riots kind of start towards the end of the day. They get some of their energy back.
Luke, it's fascinating. I know we're jumping around a lot, and there's a lot to cover, but this is crazy. The CDC, we talked a little bit about Abbas and the crazy stuff he's doing, but we also have a president of the United States that's actually making some pretty interesting things too, which I really don't get it. Why did the CDC send a the highest level of alert to the American citizens about coming to Israel. So I'm on this list. I got the email box into my email because I'm an American citizen.
Right. Yeah,
I got the alert into my box. It said Americans. Let me just read it. This is a CDC letter that opened up. It said, do not. This is the first. You open the email. This is what it says. It says, do not travel to Israel and the West Bank due to COVID-19 travel restrictions.
Whoa. COVID-19?
So, yeah, you might ask. COVID-19, what's going on?
COVID was a lot worse in parts of the U.S. than Israel.
Yeah.
And
so then he goes on,
they
though,
diagnosed like 60 new cases today.
Yeah, and Israel's
COVID,
actually...
which is like it's literally almost gone.
And if you ask anybody around the world on government standards, Israel is the one that's like the highest for taking care, like how they dealt with COVID. They're one of the best in the world. Okay, so then he also goes to slam it a little bit. He says quarantine procedures instituted by the government of Israel and the Palestinian Authority respectively. So he's also saying that they're not doing it right.
According to them.
Yeah, okay. So the level 4 is the highest level you could
Of a travel
warning. So they've done this. Okay, what are the stats? Luke, you just said it. 98% decline in daily COVID diagnosis here in Israel.
Oh, yeah. A few months ago, it was in the thousands of cases that were being diagnosed
Now
daily.
like
now it's like 50.
Yeah. Okay, so down 98%, and that's when the alert comes out. Why didn't this alert come out before? Okay, so we don't know, but Israel also is one of the most highly vaccinated, and according to Biden, that's the answer, right? According to most of the world, the medical scene says that this is the way to do it. Well, Israel has done that, so why would you say that the most vaccinated population in the world you shouldn't get? Also, does not make any sense for the president to say that. Also, Israel took the mask mandate off. So that means they've
Unless you're
reached
inside.
a point where they feel comfortable to take off the mask.
The IDF
security
is even
system.
actually looking at just completely obliterating the whole mask.
Exactly.
thing,
So
the military.
the education system has also
Back to normal, right?
relieved all COVID restrictions. Back to normal. Okay, so this is when the United States sends out a 4 flashing lights. Do not go to Israel. Literally, do not travel to Israel. That's the first line of the email. Why?
Even if you could.
Yeah, even if you could. Yeah, exactly. Well, Israel's just
most
now
people,
opening. Okay, well, here it is, Luke. Israel has just now started to prepare the way to open the border.
Right.
So they've set a date of May 23rd to open up the border to tourism to come into the country. Mm-hmm. Why would this big scare thing flash across the emails of millions of citizens, American citizens, don't go to Israel right at the window when maybe it's possible to try to come in? Yeah. Okay, you just heard the stats, guys. Literally, its first statement is because of COVID. There's really hardly any COVID left in this country. Mm-hmm. It's the best it's been in the whole COVID scenario since last year.
Right.
So it makes no sense, and I think it's political.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it's just one thing and a huge plethora of just really lowering how important Israel is to the United States.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like the Biden administration is working overtime to just kind of say, you know what, Israel?
You're not important.
We used to call you our best friend in the Middle East or our most important ally, but now you're still our friend, but you're amongst
better.
Everybody else over there. Yeah, we got to talk to Iran right now.
Yeah.
We
don't have time for you.
The United States is probably about to lift most major sanctions on Iran, just trying to get them to return back to an agreement. And a lot of people actually think that getting Iran to, or, pretending, because there's no way they've already increased uranium enrichment to 60%. I mean, come on. The deal allowed for less than 4%.
Right.
So they're going to lift sanctions to hope Iran will go back to the deal of 2015. Basically, that's more important to the United States than their friendship with Israel, because Israel has vowed they are not going to let Iran get nuclear weapons. The CDC releasing bogus travel warnings against Israel. You have the United States condemning the violence in Jerusalem a couple weeks ago when there's so much violence was happening during Ramadan. Not saying we're condemning all the Palestinian riots and terrorism and violence. No, we just condemn the violence on both sides, right? And that's now their politically correct statement. We condemn on both sides. We condemn Palestinian terrorism. We condemn settlement building in the West Bank, as if murdering Jews and building a house is equal on the scale, right? So it's really just this overtone of the United States doesn't care about Israel nearly as much as former administrations did, especially coming out of the Trump administration when it was like way, more friendship,
Right.
better friend to Israel than any other U.S. administration in recent history. Now the Biden administration's like, whoa, we're putting on the brakes on this thing. Just hold on. You're still there. You know, Biden, he's going to call Netanyahu when he's ready after elections. He's like way down on the list as far as people that he's going to give a call to.
Which just this week we had the first Israeli Mossad meeting in...
The head of the Israel's Mossad went to D.C.
US.
to meet with senior officials. I think Biden stopped in to say hello, but it wasn't anywhere near very high on
It's
his
saying that
priority
it's a
list.
potential that the outcome, we don't know for sure the outcome of that meeting. Obviously, it's Mossad.
Right.
But it's potential that
Well, it was
seems to be
definitely
that
they were talking about Iran, yeah.
the basic message that seems to be coming across is Israel don't mess with our foreign policy.
Right.
And we know that has to do with Iran.
Yes, for
That
sure.
That's what we're thinking is coming out of that. We don't know. We're going to see much more about that. But
So-
all of this being said, Israel...
Right. Americans, you need to tell your elected representatives Israel is our most important ally in the Middle East. As Christians, we are called to be friend of Israel and supporters of Israel. So call up your representatives and just tell them we are not okay with the United States just treating Israel like any old person. No, they are an important friend and ally to the United States, and we want to treat them as such. Josh, we're almost out of time, but we always try to end the show with a positive story. So much violence, terrorism,
much,
just
yeah.
a lot of sad things, tragedy happening in Israel this past week. In the wake of the shooting that happened at Tepuach Junction, a group of people went out and they established a new community. In response to that, and they actually named the community Eviatar after a man named Eviatar Borovsky, who was killed in a stabbing attack at Tepuach Junction exactly 8 years ago.
Wow.
So on the anniversary, there was another shooting, and they went out to a overlooking hill, and they established another community. And, you might hear international media say there was settler violence in the West Bank following terrorist attacks, which might be a very small, isolated group of people every once in a while. Yes, there is radicals that go out and do something in response to Palestinians. That's the number one reason we don't focus on it, because it's like 1 out of 100. You know what I mean?
Less.
If that. Yeah, you have terrorist attacks, murders, killings, and maybe a Palestinian car is torched or whatever. But the actual response of 99.9999% Jewish settlers, Israelis living here, is
Life.
to go out and build.
Yeah.
They're going to go out and pave a new road. They're going to go out and build a new house. They're going to expand neighborhoods, or they're going to go establish a new community like Eviatar overlooking the Tepuach Junction. That is the Jewish response versus the Muslim Palestinian response, which is to actually hide the terrorists and delete any footage so that the IDF might use to capture them so that they can get away. Guys, these are the two things that are happening here. But as always, the Jewish-Israeli response and attitude is life, 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 build, build, build for the generations to come.
That's right.
Guys, reach out to us. Leave us a comment below. Make sure to subscribe. In the meantime, be strong, be courageous, and be the voice of Joshua and Caleb in your generation.
I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I believe.
Hi, guys. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We also have tons more incredible content straight from Israel's heartland, which you can find completely free at joshuaandcaleb.com. If you're interested in signing up for a life-changing volunteer program in Israel's heartland, you can go to serveisrael.com. We host Christians from all over the world to help plant trees, harvest grapes, prune vines, and basically help farmers all over Judea and Samaria, all while experiencing the land and people of Israel in a way that you're never going to get on a 10-day tour. Just go to serveisrael.com to find out more information.